Hey guys, welcome in for the next episode of Make Room. Thank you again for joining us. But we're gonna jump right into the questions. But before we do, I want to introduce you to some of our panelists.
Hi, I'm Sarah Olson, and I'm from Dayton, Ohio, and I serve with Crew with Jesus Film Project Ministry.
Hi, my name is Daniel Grant. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. I'm a husband, a father, and an artist.
Hi, my name is Merlika Joseph. I'm from Orlando, Florida, and I'm currently a student at the University of Central Florida.
I'm Isaac Knox from Orlando, Florida, and I'm a professional freestyle rapper, comedian, and music producer.
Thank you guys again for joining us and being here on the panel. I just can't thank you enough for being open-minded and willing to have these conversations. So the first question I want to ask you guys is, what do you think of when you hear the terms white supremacy or white fragility?
The first thing I think of when I hear white supremacy is a indulgence in systems and cultures that allow people of lighter skin to advance further than people of darker skin. And whether or not somebody has put those structures in there, the idea of willingly indulging in that or turning a blind eye to how it makes others suffer, to me is a form of white supremacy, and probably the most common one, to just accept that things are better for you when they're not better for other people.
Do you think that it can be hard to notice or hard to term it that if these, what you said, like rules or anything like that have already been in place? Like you've already, when you're born and you're in the house, right? You already have rules in the house determined by your parents. They've always been that way. So you don't think there's anything else different or anything else wrong with it, right? So do you think it's sometimes hard for people to think that it can be a form of white supremacy if they've always known this way?
I think that's where the phrase white fragility comes in, because the root of that is that something is fragile, right? Which probably comes from the roots of the foundation. And if you're not checking the foundation, how this was built, what it was built on, then you can live in this bubble where you don't see what's really going on at the roots there. So to see that you're on fragile ground, I think can be scary for people, especially because all of us naturally view ourselves as the star of our story, right? We're the lead in the movie that we're all living in.
Yeah.
And so it makes it hard to empathize or think about what's going on with everyone else who's a so-called supporting character in our own narcissistic movie.
I don't think I separate supremacy with privilege. I think they're pretty much one and the same, white supremacy and white privilege. I don't think I was as aware of white privilege until this year, but also in the last couple of years. It's just, as I've gotten older, I've learned more about it. I've seen it. I've heard it from my friends, just their experiences. And yeah, it's crazy how you can grow up in a certain lifestyle and a certain thinking and not realize there's anything wrong with it until it's been pointed out. And it's really hard to know or hard to think like, wow, I've been growing up, kind of blinded to these issues, just kind of like as Christians, we can be blinded to the truth, or as non-Christians, we can be blinded to the truth of God. And I think it can even happen to the root of sin and to the root of privilege. And
I believe that as a person of color, being here in this country, I've always been subjected to some type of judgment. All based on the color of my skin it doesn't help the situation if I know that I'm only being judged based off of who I am. But when you have a person who thinks that they're supreme, they're not going to necessarily look in the mirror and take an account of who they are based off of who they've been. And so, yeah, I do agree with that sentiment.
I think at the same time, with dealing with white supremacy and white fragility. I think it is an inward thing that people need to look at for sure, because it is based on privilege. Because as a person of color as well, like there are things that we see about ourselves that we have to acknowledge and accept the fact, and the fact that we have to accept it, and the fact that other people think that they're above us and are telling us that this is the only way that we can accept it and this is the only things that we can acknowledge about ourselves. It makes it hard to maneuver around in the society. And the white supremacists, are also not dealing with their own emotional turmoil. They think that, like, this is how it's been forever and this is how it's going to be forever. And it's not going to change regardless of how we protest, how we, rebel against the way that society has kind of ingrained itself. And so we're stuck with trying to fight for it and trying to change it, and then they're like, well, nothing's wrong. Right. I'm still seeing it as nothing's wrong. So
I think it's a privilege, and this is to anyone who may be listening who may not have a clear understanding as to how this is a privilege. It is a privilege to be able to sit here on this panel and not have to discuss why the color of your skin is viewed as a wrong thing in certain people's eyes. Mm-hmm. That within itself is a privilege. To not be nervous to proclaim to the world that you believe that you are healed. Like, that's a privilege. And that's where we've been in our society for a really long time. Now that it's being recognized, if on a bigger scale, now that it's being recognized on a way huger scale, it feels appreciative. It feels good. It feels welcoming. And that is one of the things that I truly believe is set from God this time right now. To be a part of this time right now is such a huge deal.
Yeah, no, quickly before the thought I had on what you said, I just wanted to echo that I do think that we are in a very special time that's been ordained by God, and that, the spread of information is something that can be considered, it can be used for evil. We see that a lot. It can be used to divide people, which is kind of what a lot of people think of it mostly as. But the exchange of information has been a huge reason why a cause like this, which has been a cause that people of multiple backgrounds have fought for years and years and years, but now there's this information spread that really has lit a fire under the actual world, and not just in isolated communities, which is encouraging, and I hope it continues. I hope for everybody's sake that it continues. But what you reminded me of, and this is the flip side of the information exchange, is you mentioned, the way you mentioned fighting for this in the protests and all of that. And I think another definition or another example of white supremacy is the filter in which people see the protests. If you're seeing what's going on and you're not seeing a people group fighting for what absolutely is owed to them, which is not just equality, but equity, fairness, justice, a reconstruction of the roots of these systems. If you're not seeing an honest group of humans fighting for their actual rights, and you're instead seeing all of these negative branches and these twists and the exceptions of well, I don't like how this person goes about it, or I don't like 3% of their mission statement, whatever it is if that's your filter, you're a white supremacist.
And I think for a lot of white people, I think that fragility is coming into play, where it's like, whoa, no, I'm a Christian, I love God, I'm not a racist, or no, I have a black friend, and I think that it's really hard to grow quickly in this because we have grown up with a sinful mentality without realizing it, and it's just having to work through something that we've thought for so long, and a lie that we've believed for so long, and now it's being told in our face, on a bigger scale, that this is wrong, this is sinful. Look at all the ways that that we've suffered, and I really think that the enemy has done a great job in just blinding the white majority to God's truth and God's unity, and I think God can use this suffering for good. I mean, this evil for good, and for such a time as this, like we are having these discussions, and I think that the Lord is calling us to unity for something in the future of America, because we need to be unified. But He's also causing potential division, or allowing division. And I just think that He's revealing hearts and revealing a turn in our country's history.
Yeah, a really awesome resource is The Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby. I got to finish that book this last week, and for me as a believer, there's so much about our own history that I didn't know, about this country's history that I didn't know, and it was such an eye-opening, revealing, like I had to pause the book many times because I kind of had to take a step back and just think about like things that I've had to experience as an African American, and things I've had to witness as a person, as a Christian, and like how like even Christian culture has played a role in like how we believe and how we think, and how they've treated people who didn't look the same. And I think for people who believe, and even non-believers, that book is such a good way of the way that he presented it, like just such a good way of just showing from the beginning to now, like how much we've played a part in our own misery, and how much we played a part in our own discrepancy against people that we love and care about. Like I think there's lots of things that are being shown. It's now they're being revealed. It's not that they haven't been there. It's the fact that we're actually having to sit here and witness it. I think we talked about that last time. It's really just the fact that there's nowhere else to go and there's nothing else to do but to sit here and ponder what we've been doing. And I think now it is for such a time as this, for sure.
So my next question I want to ask is kind of a tie-in to the first one. Do you think that there is, or that systematic racism exists? Why or why not?
I think, honestly, this is without me being facetious, I think you would have to be a fool to not know that systematic racism and or oppression, and oppression exists. Just look around. There's a good movie that came out called The Founder. They were talking about how McDonald's made its founding ways here in America, from Missouri to all over the world. And one of the things that the guy did is he capitalized on the idea that all you have to do is buy property. Buy property, then you own the entire distribution, whatever comes off the property. And I love the movie because it teaches you truly how to be a strong entrepreneur, but at the same time, it shows us that systematic oppression exists. Around the same times that this guy was getting a loan, you can look into the movie if you like, but around the same time in this country, when that same man, Ray Kroc, was getting funding for his buildings and getting funding for his property that he was acquiring, I would say thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of African Americans around the country at the same time were being denied the same type of loans. That is a good, tangible explanation of racial discrimination and systematic oppression. These people who have given so much and been so much to the communities weren't even invited to invest back into the property in which they were living. And that just goes to show you that, yeah, it's there and it exists.
I mean, that's exactly right. You would have to be a fool to not think that that systemic racism exists and that it's in our roots. A couple of you talked about the history of this country, but I mean, even the modern day stats. A lot of people in the past few months have been learning about redlining and what that does to neighborhoods. Learning about the fact that people with black sounding names don't get called for as many interviews. That the sentencing in court cases for equal evidence and charges for black versus white people is different. There's all these different discrepancies that are really you can't deny it, or the fact that a black person is 2.5 times more likely to be shot and killed by police than a white person. All of these things are hard to deny, and shouldn't be denied. They should be addressed. But even beyond that, we were talking about Christianity and some of the faith elements that go into this. And there's been systemic racism in the way that the church grew after the New Testament, in the way that a faith that was a grassroots movement by a man of color, the way that it was co-opted and politicized, put a white face on it, and then the Crusades happened, which was literally oppressing and killing people in the name of Jesus, despite the fact that their actions didn't represent Jesus. And then those people ended up eventually making their way to the United States and founding a nation. So there's systemic issues in the way that Christianity arrived to the West in a way that doesn't look like the Book of Acts anymore. And so we have things to address on the political and religious side of things. So it's one of the reasons I'm glad that we're having this panel in a church, because I think as long as we're looking at our roots, we need to look at all of our roots.
I loved how you mentioned roots. I always go back to a tree for some reason. I tell people all the time that yes, because a lot of people I feel like are chopping at branches, and that's not to say that you shouldn't. My thought process is just to get to the roots though. And for America, one of the roots is black and white, the issue of slavery and everything like that. But another part of the roots, which is actually goes a lot deeper, is part of the heart, part of the faith part of things, Christianity in itself. Because you can't address one without addressing all. We can't talk about one side without talking about the other, the entirety of the picture. If you don't get that, then you'll miss part of the perspective. Why do you think that we have different accounts of the gospel? The same story, but different accounts, different people that wrote it. So if you don't read all of them, then you miss part of it.
I think about like our history books. I mean, we get one side, and then when we ask a question about where is there more to this, they're like, find it out on your own. Yeah. And it's like, no, like I'm sitting in a classroom with people from different countries, different cultures, and we're all trying to learn the same history, and you're only telling one side of it. And if I question you, I'm a problem. And so I think even if we're talking about systematic racism, we see it in every aspect of life from the moment I stepped foot into a daycare center, all up until college. Like from that very moment, the moment that they saw that I was not of lighter skin or anything like that, I was seen differently. I had this judgment placed upon me that this is who she's going to be, regardless if I know her or know anything about her. So
I think this speaks to the way I've grown up in terms of like privilege, but I didn't know. I've heard how unfair statistics are for the Black community versus the white community, but I don't think it's been until at least being in college and as an adult when I've really began to see it and hear my friends share experiences. And so I feel like, unfortunately, I was kind of blinded to systematic oppression, systematic racism, because I'm like, oh, I have Black friends in my high school and my middle school, and like we're all here, like we all get along, we're all doing well, like it's like that innocent, like yeah, we're friends, like everything's fine. And then I think for me, at least as an adult, learning more and hearing more, that's been revealed. All the missing pieces I didn't see and I didn't know, and honestly, I guess that could speak to the way I've lived and the privilege that I've had, where I didn't have to learn it and I didn't have to be told how to speak to a policeman when they pull me over. Like I guess been that just a form of a privilege that I didn't know I had.
My thought about whether or not systematic racism exists is, because I like to put things in analogies for mainly my own self to understand, but maybe it can help you as well. Whereas we all have preferences in the ways that we do things, right? The things that we like. So if you move into an apartment or into a house, you would possibly change the furniture or the decor, right? we would have a different set of rules too than the previous owner. And we would obviously determine who is allowed in. So when people are put into positions or other places, their natural inclination is to make it resemble something they are more comfortable with or familiar with. If you're not comfortable with certain people in your place of business, my bad, wait, your country, no, my bad, your place at all, your house, well, you can just make up more rules and keep them out if you wanted. So yes, systematic racism does exist. So the next question I want to ask you guys, while right now it seems like we have similar thoughts, be it different perspectives, I want to know, when you're talking to someone that you don't agree with, how do you disagree without dishonoring or distancing yourself? And I understand that sometimes there is a need to distance and not talk to that person or not go on social media. Don't. But if that is the case, when do you do that? When do you decide, or when do you know, okay, this is probably not the person I need to be talking to?
I think the moment that you feel that bubbling of anger or bitterness or that immediate need to respond, I think you need to take a step back. I've had a couple moments on social media in recent days where I'm like, man, should not be on here today, because I will respond, and it's not going to be well. And I don't want for people who know me and who look at my life to be like, well, she's a Christian, why did she respond that way? You know, I want to be able to be kind to others and, show the love of Christ through my words. And I need to sometimes just be like, they're not going to get it, and I can't make them understand. And so I need to take a step back. And we can agree to disagree at this point. But if I have to wait a couple days and separately message them about the message, or if I have to just not respond at all and just unfollow them for 30 days and snooze them for 30 days, you used to do that on every form of social media now, which is wonderful. I think after that, I'm good, and then we'll come back and we'll see if 30 days has changed their mind at all. And if it hasn't, then we're good. Then I'm good now.
It's like a social media timeout.
Yes, it's wonderful because you can do it everywhere. I wish we could do it in live sometimes, but yeah.
So again, same question. How do you, when you're in conversation with someone that you disagree with, how do you disagree without dishonoring or distancing? And if you do need to, when do you?
The when is going to be different for different people. I think that one of the most important things that I keep in mind when I'm having any of these discussions is to stick to facts and stick to things that aren't fueled by opinion or fueled by bias, and not get baited into that. Because I always think about she mentioned that if somebody's looking back and is like, oh, she responded that way, I didn't think that was who she was. I think about, if it's being read back, who is on the side of maturity, who is on the side of civil discussion, who is on the side of sharing facts. And so I think trying to be conscious of that. But here's where I have another opinion on it as well. And I know that we've talked about maybe later talking more about allyship, but this is an area where I think allyship comes into play, because for those of us that haven't had to grow up constantly being reminded of our skin color and feeling all kinds of ways about it, but often many bad ways about it because of the systems and surroundings, for those of us that haven't been exhausted by that, I think it's one of our duties as allies to not give up the conversations, to not I understand anybody needing to step away when feeling overwhelmed, but there's a part of me that goes, I haven't had to live with this every day of my life. So I get to go outside and escape this, others don't. So while I'm here, I'm not leaving this discussion until there's some sort of a resolve or until it's going around in circles and it's just over now. But I'm not going to quit this because I have the privilege of being able to quit this and others don't. So as an ally, I want to stay in the fight.
I think at the same time, like what going off what you were saying, like some people, like you need to call them out. Like we're not saying like, I'm not saying not to call people out because some people just need to get their butts lit a little bit to kind of understand that what they're saying and what they're posting and what they're commenting on is not correct. But at the same time, we don't need to wreck everybody's life.
Yeah.
You know, because some people are literally losing their jobs and you know, and for some, you know, they've been doing it in every aspect of their life and that needs to be brought to light. Yes, of course. But at the same time, we also need to think like if that was you on the other side of it, you will want people to understand like that you're a person who's learning, you know? Like we have this cancel culture, which stresses me out to no end because it's like people make mistakes 10 years ago and people are bringing it into light 10 years later. And it's like they've changed from 10 years ago. They're not the same person that they were when they posted that stupid racist comment on Twitter. They're different people. Not to say that it wasn't wrong when they did it, but right now they are different. They have changed. They have made amends for their past mistakes. Why are you shaming them now? Like, yes, call them out on it, and they don't need to be apologizing 227 times because it gets old. We don't want to hear that anymore. Like we said before, like we're tired of people saying you're sorry. Like it doesn't fix anything at this point.
But you're right, incorporating grace.
Yes, pretty much.
I think it's hard to speak to people when they're not willing to talk about it, when they're not acknowledging how big the problem is. And I think for me, I've backed off in my frequency of talking with them about the topic, and but I feel similar to you that we can't stop this until everybody understands it, and especially like people in the capital C church. Like we shouldn't keep walking in ignorant privilege, you know, like we need to learn how to stand up and be an ally to our friends. And yeah, so I think that's an area where I struggle with, where people just aren't open to receiving knowledge or open to receiving like further discussion on it. To me, that frustrates me. But I think just backing off and just decreasing my frequency of mentioning it so it doesn't get overwhelming and push them away. But to say like, hey, like, did you see this post? I thought it was so interesting, or like, I thought it was so informative, or, you know, like, what'd you think about this? Or like, I hope you're still praying, or, you know, I think just casually dropping it in every once in a while isn't too bad.
Yeah, and I will add, sorry to jump in on this one a lot, but that I think that being aware of your other, like having other positive escapes, even in your time on your phone. Like I've started very intentionally following different Instagram accounts that only share good news. Or like, you know, if I go on Reddit, I'll find just stuff that makes you escape or feel good or shows you like the lighter things going on in the world. I think is going to help to be able to refresh, to reset, and come back. And while in the long run, we can't let this go, that not only is taking the foot off the gas allowing you to reset, but it's also allowing people that have been choosing to live in ignorance or to play trolls or anything like that. It's also giving them time to get out of that moment and maybe sit with themselves and kind of restart the conversation in a way where maybe both sides are a little better able to receive.
I really just don't like social media like that. But specifically for things like what you said about trolls, I've been a part of live streams for church, right? And it's so funny how there was this dude, I couldn't see his comment because there was a lot of people, but it just seemed like there was some pushback from other people that were in the live stream, and they were saying like, well, who is this person? What is he doing here? Why is he saying all these things? And then I started to then understand this is the only reason they are here. So a lot of times, some people were literally just trying to strike up conversation just to get a rise out of you, just to see how you react, just to try to prove you wrong. I think that's another thing that's so powerful about the Holy Spirit is the power of discernment. To be able to know when that question is asked, what is that tone? Where's it coming from? Is it coming from the heart? If it is, what is their heart like? I promise you, you can actually be able to see and tell and know where that question is coming from by the Holy Spirit, by that discernment. And it's just so funny how when people are talking, like I don't mind listening, and that kind of gets me in trouble sometimes. But then you have to be mindful of knowing, okay, this person isn't trying to have a conversation but an argument. There's a difference. Okay, so next question I want to ask you guys is actually a special guest question from a friend of mine out in Texas, Nikicia. And she wanted to ask the panel, and obviously the audience too, you're willing to chime in with comments. What do you think, why do you think people refer themselves as colorblind when they're talking about race? Do you think that this word makes an impact? Is it a positive or a negative one?
I know for me, I have a friend, I'm not going to disclose his name, but he's a good friend of mine. He flew me out to Missouri for his wedding. And he's a white male. He's currently serving in the Navy. And he taught me how to shoot my first machine guns, which was really cool. I'm not anti-gun. I'm pro-gun, but I'm also pro-regulation. And so he took me out. I shot my first guns, machine guns, and we went rabbit hunting for like giant hares out in like Missouri. And he took me out there. It was me, his brother, his father, his uncle, his neighbor's nephew, and then one other person. Not too much. And we got out there, and it was like 4 in the morning, 5-ish. I had my first taste of biscuits and gravy. I had never had that before, ever.
Hey, look, I'm just saying.
This was a special day.
Yes.
Go ahead.
It was a special day. And now I'm sitting in this mom and pop type restaurant in the middle of Missouri. I'm the only black guy for like probably miles. And it's 5 o'clock in the morning, and there's people at this mom and pop shop, and it's about 30 people or so, and everyone's getting ready for the hunt in the morning. And I'm just standing out, just, you know, and at the time, I was like really, really heavy. I used to be really big. And so I'm already sticking out like a sore thumb as far as like being the black guy. So I'm here and I'm trying to get up from the chair, and I move away from the chair and I go to go get some more biscuits and gravy. And yeah, I had like 3 times in my mouth. And one guy stopped me and he said, "Are you with someone?" "Who are you with, son?" It's an older guy, probably like his 60s. And I was like, "I'm with my friends." You know, just innocently, like, I'm just with my friends. And then my friend walks over, puts his hand on the gentleman's back, and he said, "He's with us, sir." He was like, "Oh, okay." And he walked away. And I said, "I'm not blind enough, but that seemed kind of racist, bro." Like, I don't know he didn't say anything explicitly, but it was almost as though he was talking about me like as though I was property. And my friend of many years turns to me and says, "Oh, don't worry about it, bro. It wasn't racist. We don't see your color here." And I went on that entire day learning more and more about him. Not that necessarily he had this wicked heart and that he was evil, but that he had intention on looking at me as an equal. But the problem that I had with his comment was that he didn't see me. You see, blindness is a defect. I have 3 cousins who are blind. I know, and they write Braille. They read Braille, and they have gone to special schools, but they haven't been able to watch the Super Bowl with us. They haven't been able to throw a ball, catch a ball. So blindness within its own right is a defect, as harsh as that word defect may be. But all in all, when you're blind, you're not able to do certain things. And when we call ourselves colorblind, what we're saying is that I'm defective. I am no way, shape, or form able to see you as who you are. There's something wrong with me. So that within its right is also racial discrimination, in my opinion, because if you're not physically blind or physically colorblind, you can see my perspective. Give me the dignity and the human decency to look at me as though I am such. Look at me as though I'm a human. Don't ignore the fact that I'm here. Because when my mother birthed me, she didn't give birth to Casper. She gave birth to me. And if you call yourself my friend, then act as such. So that made for an awkward conversation on the way back from Hunting to Harris. And yeah, and it changed me and it changed him.
All I was gonna say is that's a perfect example of how I feel about the phrase "I don't see color," which is that even when people mean it with inclusive intentions, it's dismissive. And there are also people that mean it dismissively. So, like, regardless of how it's meant, there is, again, robbing somebody of their identity and of their culture. Because there's and not that every Black American necessarily lives in a way that reflects an African culture or anything like that, but that there is such rich culture that is rooted there, and some people feel robbed of it when you're just the Black friend in the white group. Because now we don't see color because you act like us. Whereas, like, but would those same I don't see color white friends want to be the white guy in the Black neighborhood? You know what I mean? And so there's kind of this, like, there's I don't see color because you act like us, or because you're with us, therefore you're wrapped in our culture. Whereas, again, that there's these underlying things that I feel like is mostly unintended when people say it, but is felt by the recipient. And that's what's most important. So, and my mom did give birth to Casper, that's why it's so right. That should have been my fun fact.
Yeah. It's so funny how when we're talking about culture and diversity, we should kind of relish in diversity, relish in the differences that we have amongst one another, because they are what kind of make us beautiful all at the same time. I mean, we always say that America is a beautiful country, a great country, and primarily because of how diverse it is. You can do what you want, say what you want for the most part. But at the same time, is that something that we say? Is that our mantra? Or do we actually act it out? Because for a lot of my friends that are in Germany and Brazil, they're asking me questions like, man, what are you guys doing? Like, we're getting over this, or we're like on the decline while you guys seem to be spiking in racial tensions or COVID, whatever the case may be. It's just like, do you guys really believe that you guys are united as a country, or do you guys pretend to be?
I actually have a theory that I've thought about for years, especially once I finally got to travel outside the U.S. a little more often, and it's meant as a compliment to what the United States can be. It's meant as a compliment to our potential and our ceiling and the ambition of what we claim to set out to do in this new world. It's that one of the reasons that we see so much racial tension is because of my favorite thing about America, which is the presence of different races, the diversity, right? But the existence of it is, which belongs there. The evil is that those that are in their majority, that are in power, feel threatened when they see a large presence of minorities around. That threatens the scales. And the reason I say this is because many other countries that have millennia of culture deep rooted in, and I'm not going to call out any countries because I don't want this to, I'm not attacking, but there is racism in most other countries. You don't see it because the majority is so overwhelming, and the culture is thousands of years deep in terms of what the way of life is. So if a white person or a Black person or Hispanic or wherever comes to one of these countries, well, the majority doesn't feel like their way of life is going to be threatened. You know what I mean? Because it's so built deep. Whereas in the United States, we are still a new country. We are built by so many different cultures and races. There was the Native Americans here, and then obviously agriculture and so many different things were built by slaves who didn't volunteer to come here. And then we hired Asians to build our railroads. And then, Hispanics came in, and I mean, we live in Florida. Most of our cities are named after Hispanic. Like, because of all of this diversity, there is the presence of strong minorities, which threatens the majority, which it's the fault of the majority that there's issue. But again, this is a long way of saying, I do think that in a weird backwards way, our racial tension comes from the worthy ideal of let's all coexist here. It just creates tension, but it shouldn't. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it did. Any other thoughts to add?
I think, like, to kind of go off what you said, like, we have this, like, the great American dream. You come to this country, especially if you're not, from another country, you come here and you think that this is going to be a new way of life, a new way of existing. There's going to be great opportunities here because it's shown that way. But then you come and you become a part of this society and a part of this culture, and then you slowly kind of get to see things change a little bit. People are like, well, if you just do good in school, if you, apply yourself harder, you'll make it out, especially if you weren't born of privilege. But in reality, that's not really the case, because for most of us, we are working hard. Our parents are working 2-3 jobs, like, we didn't grow up with money, and, we're trying to make it out of here. But the system doesn't allow it, because they're seeing you as, of course, less than. And then we go back to, like, systematic oppression and systematic racism, and then you're dealing with all of these again. And when people say, well, I don't see your color, I just see you as you, well, you're not seeing me. Like, if you look at me, you know that I'm different from you. Like, my hair is not the same color as yours. It's definitely not the same texture as yours. Like, I may talk like you, because I have an education. But at the same time, like, I have had people tell me, well, you're kind of an Oreo, black on the outside, white on the inside. I'm like, why? Like, why do you say that? Oh, well, you talk white. But what does that mean? Like, what does that mean for you? I talk with enunciation in my speech. I listened in my English class. Like, I don't know why that should affect the way that you see me. I'm still black. That's not going to change. I was born black. I'm going to die black. That's not going to change at all. But you need to acknowledge the fact that I am different from you, that there are things in my life that I've had to deal with that you will probably never, ever have to deal with. And I think when we don't see that, we miss the point of seeing others' diversity. We miss seeing that everyone in this nation is different. So I think that's what people need to open their eyes to.
Just lost the thought. We were talking about diversity. I think the reason why a lot of, and this goes back to the first question, and also ties into this idea of racial discrimination, but I think that because there is a large demographic of white people here in the country that don't embrace the culture in which they came from, it kind of obliterates the idea that anyone else who looks different is okay, if that makes sense. Like, I know my white friends that were from Missouri, their parents come from Germany, Frankfurt, Germany, exactly. And they're like the second generation of people who are here in this country. I'm first gen American. So they have a long history of having family that is from Germany, but they don't do anything that's German. They just want to do everything that's like almost pop American culture. And I feel like they would have a better time understanding diversity if they embrace where their lineage comes from, their immediate lineage comes from. You know what I mean? Yeah. Instead of being like, oh, well, this is American. I only believe in these type of freedoms. Like, yeah, I believe in them too. I don't want to be able to go outside and be like, yeah, I'm free, just as you do. But like, I still celebrate my Central American culture. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I celebrate my Caribbean culture because of who I am. Now, if you did the same thing, you wouldn't be as distracted with the fact that you think that we're going to overpopulate in the next 40 years,
Yeah.
and then there'll be no other people who look like you. Like, you know, so that was just my thought.